Hello, welcome to From Caracas. I'm Laura Prada, and in this opportunity we'll be talking to Kwesi Pratt, who is a journalist and a political activist from Ghana, to whom we'll be talking about that bridge that brings together Africa and Latin America and the Caribbean. Welcome.
Hello, thank you.
I want to ask you, what are you doing in Venezuela, and what is your interest here?
Well, first and foremost, I came to express full solidarity with the working people of Venezuela and their government for striving to maintain their national independence and sovereignty. I came to give support to President Maduro, who has been elected, for another 6-year term. And I came to give this solidarity in the face of the unjustified aggression from the United States of America and from the Lima Group and other reactionary centers around the world. It is my duty as an African and as a revolutionary to support all revolutionary causes around the world. And President Maduro is leading the way in Venezuela and linking up with other countries like Cuba.
Why is it important that social movements, that progressive movements bind together and work to defend that project?
Well, first of all, because the reactionary forces around the world, the forces of imperialism and the forces of neoliberalism, are working together. They are uniting. And their purpose is to send us back to the days of slavery and colonialism. We can only survive if we work together. We can only survive if we pool our resources together. We can only survive if we show solidarity to the different causes around the world.
Talking about resources, a country like Venezuela, which has similar resources like Ghana, is there a risk that the administration of that wealth lead to a similar situation that we have seen in history in Africa, that resources call other people's interests?
Well, for hundreds of years, the peoples of Asia, Africa, and Latin America have become victims of the predatory instincts of imperialism. We went through the transatlantic slave trade, where our forebears were captured as beasts of burden. We've gone through classical colonialism, where practically the colonial powers owned everything in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. And we are now in the period of neocolonialism. Indeed, if you look at Africa, Africa is the richest continent in the world. Africa has close to 50% of the world's total resources. And yet the people of Africa suffer illiteracy, they suffer malnutrition, they suffer all kinds of manifestations of poverty. The only way out of this quagmire is for us to unite. The only way out of this quagmire is for us to pool our resources together, to resist our slavery, to pool our resources together so that we can assert ourselves, decide for ourselves what future we want to build for ourselves and generations to come.
Talking about unity and that importance of the South being together, I want you to talk me about the South-South cooperation in the moment, because I know that you are part of the project Pan-Africa TV, and we are in Telesur, which is making an approach to Africa in the moment. How is that South-South cooperation can be expressed in this opportunity?
Well, first of all, I refuse to see South-South cooperation in geographical terms. Because Bolsonaro is in Brazil, Brazil is in the South. And yet, Bolsonaro's rule is part of the worldwide fascist movement, which would not lead to our liberation. So it's not a geographical description to be talking about South-South. I see South-South, meaningful South-South, as cooperation and the working together of peoples who want to be free, peoples who want to build a new world of equal citizens, people who want to build a new world in which no child goes to bed on an empty stomach. And it is in that context that we are beginning to talk to Telesur. And we are talking to Telesur because the vision of Telesur is not substantially different from our vision. Our vision is to tell the real story, the true story of people who are engaged in struggle for national liberation, people who are engaged in struggle for building self-reliant societies and so on. Our vision is to prevent the situation where the big media in the West confuses our people, disarms our people, and facilitate their continued enslavement. Telesul is one of the best examples of cooperation in Latin America, with a view to telling the authentic story of the African people, with a view to mobilizing our people to free themselves from all forms of underdevelopment and slavery.
Now I want you to identify me some of those similarities between the two countries, between Ghana and Venezuela, and between the two continents, from their social and cultural point of view. Is there a chance that the two countries can be more linked together despite the distance, and the two continents are linked together despite the distance?
Well, first of all, if you look at the world from a historical perspective, all of the world has one history. A history which starts from primitive communalism, through slavery, through feudalism, through capitalism, and the new international effort by progressive forces to construct socialism. So all of the world is linked together by a common history. We in Africa are particularly linked with countries like Cuba, like Venezuela, and so on, because some of our people live here. I mean, there's a large percentage of the Venezuelan population which is African, and which came here as a result of the transatlantic slave trade. Indeed, if you look at the cultural practices in Brazil, in Ecuador, in Cuba, and elsewhere, it is clear that there's a strong bond, you know, in terms of our religion, in terms of our food, in terms of many other cultural practices and so on. For example, if you take cassava, cassava is a staple food here. It's a staple food in Cuba. It's a staple food in many of the Latin American countries. We tend to think together. We tend to act together. And it is very, very important to recognize that after the success of the 1959 revolution in Cuba, Ghana was the first country to recognize the Cuban government and establish diplomatic relations with Cuba. That says a lot. If you look at our struggle for national liberation in Africa, you cannot ignore the fact that Cuban internationalist forces fought in Angola to consolidate the freedom of the Angolan people, to create the conditions for the defeat of apartheid, and to create the conditions for the independence of Namibia. Cubans lost their lives to bring us where we are. And today, the people of Venezuela, under their dynamic leadership, is also treading the same path. We have a lot in common, and we cannot do anything but work together for our own salvation.
Talking about that solidarity with Venezuela, recently Chancellor Jorge Arreaza made a visit to Ghana and to other countries in Africa, part of the called Dignity Tour. How that visit brought the basis of a better or of a broader South-South cooperation between Ghana and Venezuela, and on the other hand, how this necessity to be on each other's side have made social movements work harder to defend, to support each country.
The visit of officials, no matter how high they are, may be important, but it is not everything. Officials talk at the official level. They talk at the formal diplomatic level and so on. It contributes to promoting understanding. It contributes to building relationship. But ultimately, a people-to-people relationship is superior, you know, to that of what the diplomats do and what the heads of states do and so on. And it is in this connection that I'm excited about the fact that next month there will be an International People's Assembly in Caracas, bringing together thousands of activists from around the world to network, to share ideas, and to show support for the Venezuelan revolution, which takes its inspiration from Bolivar, who is an outstanding fighter for national liberation in Latin America.
Talking about social movements and meetings in Caracas, some years ago you participated on an African America intellectual meeting that was held here in Caracas. And you and your fellow intellectuals state that you were worried you hadn't seen any progress regarding fighting patriarchy male domination and gender analysis in Africa. What perspective do you hold with regard to the fulfillment of Millennium Goals in African countries, and especially in your country, and in the world in general, in the global South?
Well, there are a lot of battles that we have to fight. And all over the world, the most disadvantaged people are women and children and poor people. So the question of gender equality is a very important question everywhere around the world. The struggle against patriarchy is a very important struggle, and so on. So this is what makes the difference between revolutionaries and reactionaries. This is what makes the difference between revolutionaries and counter-revolutionaries. As revolutionaries, we have a duty to ourselves and to our societies to ensure that we build societies of equal citizens. Looking into the future, what do I see? There can only be success for us. We cannot be defeated because our cause is right. And no cause which is right has been defeated in history. We will win.
Which is the main challenge of revolutionaries in this moment? In this moment when wars are threatening, when there is a far-right approaching and gaining the leadership of countries, which is that challenge?
You know, in the 1980s, there was a surge of neoliberalism, and many progressives, socialists and revolutionaries had thought that we would move from neoliberalism to socialism, and that neoliberalism was going to create the conditions for intensified struggle around the world. Unfortunately, what we are seeing now is that there's a real danger of the spread of fascism. You understand? And that it is not automatic that the hardships that are imposed by the neoliberal regimes will lead to socialism. And we are seeing that. We are seeing that in the Philippines, where Duterte has been elected as president. We are seeing that in Brazil, where Bolsonaro has been elected as president. We are seeing that in Europe. I mean, the rise of the far right in France, in the United Kingdom, everywhere, should warn us that the world is heading towards fascism, and that a lot of work needs to be done in order to realize the full aspirations of our people, whether in Asia, Latin America, Africa, North America, or South America. We have a lot of work to do.
How that global South, not geographical South, how is that global South must make a space to show itself to the world, to break that mass media, to those corporate media that change the message that comes from Africa, from Latin America, from Asia?
It's a struggle. We do not expect Fox Television to be promoting the causes of the African people, the underprivileged and so on. We expect Telesu to do that. So we need to do a lot more media work, establish media outlets, and provide a linkage, you know, with all the progressive media outlets around the world. And that is why we are here, talking to Telesu and seeing what work we can do together. Of course, there are many other progressive media outlets around the world. I mean, in India, you have People's Dispatch, which is doing a lot of work. In South Africa, there's the New Frame, and so on. You understand? So our task is to link these media outlets. After all, the reactionary media is working together. Why don't we work together? We have no choice but to work together. And I believe that we have the resources in terms of brain power, in terms of our commitment to our struggle, in terms of the physical space and so on, to be able to develop a viable alternative to the reactionary media which wants to perpetuate our enslavement.
Inside of that struggle, which is the role of the social movements, and why not also multilateral agencies in that struggle?
Well, everything works together. Nothing is excluded. The gender movement is important, the trade unions are important, the political parties are important, the media houses are important. All of our people need to work together towards this goal.
when we can see a revolution in Africa that breaks all those messages that have been spread through the years to the world through media, that shows Africa for itself, what it represents, what its real importance to the world?
The revolution in Africa has been on for hundreds of years, and it is continuing. It started with a resistance which was raised by ordinary people and so on against their capture as slaves. The African Revolution is also the Haitian Revolution, which was led by Toussaint Louverture in freeing, Haiti and establishing a new state of African people and so on. The African Revolution included the National Liberation Phase, where we gained independence. We defeated apartheid, and we won't defeat the other forces represented by neoliberalism. It's interesting, for example, that only recently the African National Congress of South Africa is beginning to raise the question of ownership of land. Of course, Zimbabwe started raising the question of ownership of land with some consequences, because the right-wing forces mobilized their forces against Zimbabwe. They strangulated Zimbabwe and so on. But South Africa is beginning to raise the same question about access to land. Who should own land and who should use land and so on. That is part of the revolution in Africa. Part of the revolution in Africa is the struggles of people in mining communities, struggling to preserve the environment. Part of the struggle in Africa is the struggle of the working people for better conditions of life and work. Part of the struggle in Africa is the struggle of students fighting for more academic freedom and so on. So the revolution in Africa is ongoing. It's not stopping. It has never stopped for hundreds of years. And we are making gains. We are achieving huge successes in Africa.
I want to also go a little bit back and talk, because you were talking to me earlier and I asked you about the social movements that are supporting Venezuela.
World. It is not the country with the most intelligent people and so on. And yet, it has a very, very strong and special role in world affairs. How is that? It is because the dollar has become the currency of preference in international trade. You understand? The dollar has become an instrument of oppression, an instrument of control, and so on. What do we have to do? In Venezuela, the government has started some measures in order to be able to deal with this, and that includes, for example, the introduction of the petrol and so on. But Venezuela cannot do it alone. It is impossible for Venezuela to do it alone. So you need to have a lot more countries coming to the table and designing a new world order, a new world information order, a new world economic order, and a new world political and social order. We will be moving towards our liberation if we stopped trading in the dollar. And for now, I see countries like Russia, I see countries like Iran, India, and Venezuela playing the leading role in moving away from the dollar as the currency of preference in international trade.
Is that part of the struggle revolutionaries have in this moment?
Of course. It's a major part of the struggle. We need to ask ourselves, how come that the blockade against Cuba for close to 60 years has persisted and affected the Cuban economy so very strongly? We need to ask ourselves, how come that Venezuela is suffering hyperinflation in spite of its resources and so on? And the bottom line is clear that the world international economic order is not in our interest, and it has to change.
Thank you very much, Kwesi.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you
for letting us understand a little bit better that relationship between that global south.
I hope I understand it myself.
Yes, completely.
Okay.
Thank you for meeting us from Caracas this time. We talked with Kwesi Pratt, who is a journalist and political activist from Ghana, who brought us closer to that country and to that continent to understand that relationship that goes on for years. Thank you very much again.
Thank you.
Until next time.
Enjoy our programming from Monday to Friday, where you'll find the best information on culture, innovation, conservation, human well-being. Keep up to date on the latest innovations in science and technology with Atomun. The habits and knowledge you need to live a healthy lifestyle are on Guide Your Body. Environmental consciousness is required to preserve our Earth. Undergo your transformation on Green Zone. All about equity, diversity, and respect for identities on By Gender, Cultural Manifestations.